His Excellency President Vladimir Putin, Their Excellencies, the African heads of state and government, the people of Uganda send you greetings and well wishes. I have had the good fortune of watching and participating in freedom activities in our area for the last 60 years plus. In order to understand the struggles we have been involved in, we should be reminded that by 1900, the whole of Africa had been colonized except for Ethiopia. This colonization followed 500 years of taking slaves from Africa and the devastation that criminal trade caused. It was not only Africa that was colonized, but also much of Asia, India, Indonesia, Indochina, Burma, the Philippines, Malaysia, etc., and the subjugation and extermination of the indigenous people of the Americas and Australia. However, these criminal acts by the imperialists, the slave trade and colonialism, provoked the colonized people into launching a resistance movement by some of the black people in the United States of America, in the persons of Du Bois and Pademont, who launched the Pan-African movement. This was the first step. Secondly, in 1912, the African National Congress of South Africa was launched, led by new resistance fighters different from before, when the leaders of the resistance were the kings and chiefs, such as Kabarega of Uganda, Mkwawa of Tanzania, Lobengura of Zimbabwe, Mwanga of Uganda. Thirdly, the huge country of the Soviet Union was taken over by communists in 1917, and so was the huge country of China in 1949. Those communists were staunch anti-imperialists. Fourthly, our good fortune was that the greedy imperialists started fighting among themselves over us. I'm referring here to the so-called First and Second World Wars. In effect, these were inter-imperialist wars vying for domination of the world. In those wars, the imperialists weakened themselves to the advantage of the anti-colonial movement. That is how India, Pakistan, Indonesia, etc. got independence. Some of the imperialists tried to cling to colonies, but they were defeated in Algeria, Vietnam, Kenya, Mozambique, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and South Africa. Fifthly, even within the imperialist countries, we had allies that were against the evil system. People like Fena Brockway, Dingo Foot, Olof Palme were with us and with our parents before us in opposing this evil system. It is these 5 factors that caused the defeat of the imperialism and restored our sovereignty to some extent. These are, again, the anti-colonial movement in Africa, Asia and Latin America, the rise of communism in the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, North Korea, etc., the 2 inter-imperialist wars of the last century that caused the weakening of the imperialist countries to our advantage, even when our parents were used as cannon fodder in those criminal wars, fighting the Japanese in Burma, the Italians in Ethiopia, the Germans in North Africa and Europe. Then fifth, the Pan-African movement, launched by some of the black people in the United States of America, and the support by some fair-minded persons in the imperialist countries, persons, as I've already said, like Fena Brockway, Dingo Foot, all of Parliament, and others. We are therefore happy to be here in Russia, and we take this opportunity to thank the Soviet peoples and other socialist countries for that support. However, flag independence did not, in the majority of cases in Africa, mean healthy disengagement with imperialist economies. Up to now, many of the African economies still face the bottlenecks and distortions of the colonial era. Although some progress has been achieved, a lot remains to be done. That is why you hear that the GDP of Africa is currently US dollars 2.7 trillion, smaller than the individual economies of countries like Japan, Germany, etc., not to mention the United States or China. This stunting of the African economies is caused by a number of bottlenecks that I may not have time to enumerate here. We have, however, identified them, and we are handling them together with our brothers in the African Union. However, one example can bring out some of these bottlenecks. This is the issue of coffee. The global value of coffee businesses currently is US dollars 460 billion. 460 billion. This is the value of the coffee in the world. However, all the coffee producing countries in the world, Africa, Brazil, Colombia, Vietnam, all of us, take only US dollars 25 billion out of this. The coffee business in the world, 460 billion. All of us, the coffee producers in the world, our share, $25 billion. Africa's share is US dollars 2.5 billion. Out of the 460 billion, Africa's share is 2.4 billion. With Uganda taking $800 million, because we are now producing 800 million bags of 60 kilograms each. Germany, a non-coffee producing country, earns US dollars from coffee, 6.85 billion from coffee, more than all the African coffee producing countries. My young friend from Burkina Faso was asking about this, where the problem is. I could see he's very worried, our young soldier there. So you have the answer here. This is part of modern slavery. This is the modern slavery. What is causing this? Africa being locked into, and also locking itself into, only producing raw materials of agriculture, minerals, etc., and abstaining from adding value. A kilogram of good coffee today earns about US dollars 2.5. The same kilogram roasted and processed outside Africa earns about US dollars 40. So we get $2.5 for a kilo of coffee. Somebody who is clever outside gets $40. This is the hemorrhage that has stunted Africa's growth. There are other bottlenecks, but I do not have time to go into them. Therefore, my proposal to our allies of Russia, India, China, etc., is to point out to them that they could help here by policy decisions to buy value-added products from Africa rather than raw materials. Those are products like processed coffee instead of bean coffee, chocolate instead of cocoa beans, textiles instead of just cotton, steel instead of iron ore. Iron ore, we call it, our languages are richer than English, we call it obtare. Obtare, that's iron ore, different from the metal. Electric batteries, instead of just lithium, etc. Part of the issues we are solving among ourselves in Africa is the issue of the free flow of goods and services in the continental free trade area. If this is addressed, the other problem of food, which people are talking about so much, for African societies, will also be partially addressed. In Uganda, we don't have a problem of food. Uganda is a net exporter of food. Products like maize, milk, bananas, fruits, fish, cassava, not to mention beverages like coffee, tea, cocoa, vanilla, etc. are produced in big quantities, and with irrigation, bigger quantities are possible. Without irrigation, our farmers produce 5.3 tons of bananas per hectare. With irrigation and fertilizers, that production has gone 53 tons per hectare in some of the government-supported farms. It is therefore important for our partners to know that some of the African countries, such as Uganda, produce huge quantities of food, and moreover, food of unique nutritional value, beef with yellow fat, instead of the cholesterol-laden types you get from many parts of the world, potassium-rich bananas, high cream milk, fish with a nuni, Nairopatch bladder, that is a cure for some maladies, millet with protein, carbohydrates, and iron together. What we actually need are markets in both Africa and beyond. This is part of the problem. Some of the African countries have got a lot of food, but they cannot sell it to the other countries because of the trade barriers within Africa. Secondly, you could also encourage your companies.
Кроме того, вы можете также работать с своими компаниями, чтобы они сами способствовали созданию добавочной стоимости в Африке.
Value addition to the abundant raw materials in Africa means more jobs for the unemployed African youth that are dying in the Mediterranean trying to reach Europe, and more money in their pockets. They will then afford to pay for more electricity generated by turbines made from outside, which creates more jobs and money for the turbine producers outside. After some delays, we in Africa are making some good moves. One of them is the CFTA, the Continental Free Trade Area, that is uniting the huge market of Africa of 1.5 billion people. We shall be 2.5 billion in the next 30 years. Remember that Africa is 12 times bigger than India in land area. But until recently, the population of India has been bigger than that of Africa. Therefore, Africa has actually been underpopulated for much of the millennia. The fact that it is the origin of man, Homo sapiens sapiens, 4.5 million years ago, notwithstanding. Today, on account of modern medicine, Africa will have optimal population for the first time in human history. Finally, those who foment wars on account of ideological issues are wrong, and they are time and opportunity wasters. Human history will move on whether they like it or not. Did the religious wars in Europe impose religious conformity in the world? You remember there were people who wanted to make sure that everybody is a Catholic, wanted to make sure, and they were using war, and what happened? They failed. Did Metternich, there was the Austria of the Austro-Hungarian Empire called Metternich. Did Metternich's Holy Alliance stop the spread of capitalism and the overthrow of feudalism? When there was a revolution in France in 1789, this revolution was a bourgeois revolution, was a capitalist revolution. Now, Metternich was supporting feudalism. And his answer was to launch war to defeat the capitalist movement in France. But he failed. The only justified wars are the just wars, like the anti-colonial wars. Wars of hegemony will fail and waste time and opportunity. Dialogue is the correct way. I thank you. Thank you so much.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. It is true that slavery today is recognized by all as a crime. There is no denying that. But back in the day, they did everything to fight against you during the liberation struggle. Obtaining your own flag, as mentioned by our colleague, is not enough to be truly independent. Certain countries are trying to retain their monopoly in the area of finance, in the area of technology, in the area of digital technology, and in the area of food. This is unacceptable. We shall fight against that. And many of those present here are aware that the Soviet Union and Russia never believed that we should just buy the raw materials from Africa. Remember how many industries, how many power plants and steel plants were produced and constructed by the Soviet Union in Africa. We shall come back to that practice, and we will be doing that on a bilateral and international basis. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency President Azali Assoumani, the Chair of the African Union and President of Comoros, Your Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, the Chair of the African Union Commission, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, honorable representatives of various countries represented here, ministers and guests, and ladies and gentlemen. Allow me, President Putin, at the onset to thank you, as well as the government and the people of the Russian Federation, for receiving us here in Petersburg and according us great hospitality, and especially last night's wonderful and delicious dinner, and the outstanding performance that displayed the culture of Russia, and especially of St. Petersburg, which is the cultural capital of Russia. We also want to thank you for enabling the artists to end their performance with the great African sounds and drums and dance. That touched our hearts and made us feel at home, and thank you very much for that. Nearly 3 years ago in the city of Sochi, we pledged as African leaders and as the Russian Federation to cooperate in a manner that is mutually beneficial and that serves the interests of our respective peoples. In the intervening years, we have experienced strong geopolitical and economic crosswinds. We continue to count the human cost of the devastating COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on our economies. As South Africa, and indeed as Africa, we are greatly encouraged by the Russian Federation's commitment to deepening collaboration with the nations of Africa. This is important as we chart a new course for economic development, growth, and prosperity, and as we seek to achieve the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. As South Africa, we remember with deep gratitude how the support of the people and the government of the then Soviet Union supported our struggle for liberation. as well as the struggles of many other countries and nations on our African continent. Today, our bilateral relationship remains strong. We continue to collaborate in political, economic, social, defense, and security spheres. We work closely across multilateral platforms such as the United Nations, the G20, and as members of BRICS. Our participation in forums such as this one is guided by our quest to realize the African Union's Agenda 2063 vision of economic integration and inclusive socio-economic development. As you know, and as a member of BRICS yourselves, as the Russian Federation, South Africa will shortly be hosting the 15th BRICS Summit in Johannesburg. We see this summit as an opportunity to promote enhanced global cooperation and to achieve common prosperity for the nations of Africa. The BRICS partners are significant investors in Africa. The upcoming summit will therefore give particular attention to infrastructure development supported by the new development bank, the BRICS Bank that is, as well as also supported by the African Continental Free Trade Area from a trading point of view. The African Continental Free Trade Area, once fully operational, will unlock the benefits of the continental market and generate mutually beneficial opportunities for both African and BRICS countries alike. As clearly articulated by other leaders who have spoken before me, but more especially the very wise words of President Museveni, African countries are shaping their own destinies as nation-states and as a continent. Our substantial resources must be harnessed first and foremost for Africa's benefit, to grow Africa's economies and to pursue sustainable development. And as stated by others, we no longer want to be exporting ore, soil, and dusts and rocks from the minerals of our continent, but we want to be exporting finished products that have value. There must be respect also for what we do as countries, and we must stop those countries that count their wealth and their assets in terms of the minerals that reside in the African soil, like they did in the past when they counted their wealth. They used to count their wealth in the number of slaves that they owned, that were taken from the African continent. Respect and mutual benefit should underpin what we as Africa do as we relate to other countries in the world. African countries should, as sovereign states, be able to also pursue their own independent foreign policy approaches that are not beholden to any other major global power or blocs. This second Russia-Africa summit is an opportunity to further enhance and strengthen international cooperation and partnership for Africa's development. We welcome the focus on further cooperation between Russia and Africa to promote investment, to facilitate development of value chains and boost capacity to produce and to export finished and manufactured products. The proposed Africa-Russia action plan for the coming years should align with the second 10-year implementation plan of the AU's Agenda 2063. This will ensure that there is coherence and that the plan is action-oriented, based on real practical interventions. We should also ensure joint monitoring and evaluation of the action plan. We need to jointly allocate the necessary funding for implementation and be accountable for concrete deliverables. Geopolitical tensions are negatively affecting countries across Africa. As part of Russia-Africa cooperation, we must repeat our call for existing global institutional mechanisms to be strengthened and reformed. Greater participation of our countries of the Global South will promote inclusiveness and engender trust. In this regard, the reform of the multilateral financial institutions, as well as the reform of the United Nations Security Council, remain a priority for us. It is totally unfair, inequitable, and unacceptable that a continent that represents 1.3 billion people continues to be not represented on the UN Security Council. In our interconnected world, we are all affected by conflict and instability in other parts of the world. We have a responsibility as nations to work for peace, to support peace building, and to lend our every effort to bring an end to conflict and war wherever it occurs. As South Africa, we are steadfast in our position that negotiation and dialogue and adherence to the United Nations Charter are necessary for the peaceful and just resolution of conflicts. It is our hope that constructive engagement and negotiation can bring about an end to the ongoing conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. We want to thank you, President Putin, for receiving and listening to the African leaders who came to St. Petersburg on the 17th of June, led by the Chair of the African Union, His Excellency President Azali Assoumani, where we discussed a number of issues that we believed could lead to a solution of the conflict. And we look forward to engaging further with you later today to hear precisely how some of those proposals can be taken forward. In conclusion, we look forward to the Russia-Africa Summit playing a key role in supporting our objectives of African integration, economic growth, peace, and prosperity. I thank you.
Спасибо большое, уважаемый коллега, дорогой друг. Мы с вами солидарны в том, что касается перспектив развития отношений Россия-Африка. Мы с вами в постоянном контакте и будем продолжать это делать. Сегодня, как я уже говорил, уделим особое внимание на... Dear friends, morning. Мы начинаем нашу работу,
We are starting our work,
точнее, продолжаем
or to be more precise, we continue our work.
открываем
We are now opening the first plenary session of the Russia-Africa Summit.
уважаемый господин
Distinguished Mr. Museveni,
уважаемые главы
distinguished heads of state and government,
руководители,
heads of delegations,
уважаемые друзья,
distinguished friends and colleagues.
рад приветствовать вас
I am glad to welcome you at the plenary session of the second Russia-Africa Summit.
подавляющего большинства африканских государств.
Here we have the representatives of the vast majority of African states and the heads of the leading regional organizations.
Свидетельствует о
This provides us with solid proof of the mutual aspirations of our countries and peoples to develop cooperation in all the areas, to enhance fair, open and constructive partnership. Russia and Africa share the strong ties of friendship and mutually beneficial relations, which had started in the middle of the previous century, in the years of the fight of the peoples of the African continent for their freedom. Over the decades, we have been providing support in the struggle of the African nations against colonialism. Unfortunately, certain aspects of colonialism still remain and are still practiced by the former metropolises, in particular in the economic, information and humanitarian areas. Russia remembers and honors the memory of the distinguished sons of Africa. To name a few, dear friends, we shall remember and we shall not forget them. The names such as Patrice Lumumba, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Nelson Mandela, Ahmed Ben Bella, Omar al-Mukhtar, Kwame Nkrumah, Samora Machel, Leopold Senghor, Kenneth Kaunda, Julius Nyerere. We also remember the other African freedom fighters and the national leaders of the African states. Based on the principles of equality and justice, they firmly defended the independence of their peoples, often at the price of their own life. The ideals of freedom, independence and sovereignty are quite important now in the current turbulent conditions on the international arena, when we're witnessing the establishment of a truly multipolar world order, and the era of domination of one or several states is becoming a thing of the past, albeit with the resistance of those who got used to the idea of their own exceptionalism and monopoly in global affairs. It is no accident that the second Russia-Africa Summit goes under the slogan for peace, security and development. We're focusing not only on the expansion of the Russian-African strategic partnership, but also such cornerstone topics as global and regional stability, sustainable development of the continent, enhancing sovereignty of the African states in all the dimensions. Russia and the African states stand together to construct a new, more fair and just architecture of the world order. Together, we defend international law, the UN Charter and the central role of this global organization. We are trying to coordinate our approaches on the key issues of the international agenda. It is important to note that we have shared or similar positions on many of them. This is manifested by the main positions of the political declaration, which is drafted to be adopted by the summit. Russia and African countries are expanding cooperation in countering the spread of the terrorist threat, to react to the challenges in the area of information security. Together, we stand against the use and abuse of the topic of climate, human rights and so-called gender agenda for the self-centered political interests. We do not accept such illegal practices as unilateral sanctions and restrictive or even punitive measures that damage the countries who pursue an independent policy, which create economic problems in the global scale and hold back our development. And we cannot accept the replacement of the international law with the so-called rules-based world order that certain countries declare themselves and interpret and distort and change themselves. It is not entirely clear what these rules are and who created them. It is clear that certain countries are using them in their own interest and change them for their own benefit. Most importantly, Russia and Africa share our inherent aspiration to defend true sovereignty and the right for our own path of development in the political, economic, social, cultural and other areas. Such aspiration to independence and sovereignty does not equal self-isolation. Quite the contrary, it means openness and cooperation of the free states and peoples, states as equals in their rights. Sovereignty is not something you achieve, it is something you have to keep fighting for to maintain. That is why I would like to remind you the words of Nelson Mandela, who said, "Do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." The same goes for state sovereignty. We need to defend it. We shall not step back or cave in under external pressure. In this aspiration to stay independent, to defend the sovereignty and take part in the establishment of the multipolar system based on states' equality, Russia and Africa show full solidarity with each other. Let me note that we witness the African continent becoming a new center of power. Its political and economic role is on the rise exponentially, and everyone shall take this reality into account. Let us take the example of the initiative of several African states for the settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. This is an acute issue, and we continue considering it. And this means a lot. Previously, any intermediary missions had been essentially monopolized by the countries with so-called developed democracies. But now it's different. Now Africa stands ready to help us find solutions for the issues outside of the zone of its original interests, and we respect your initiatives and take them into consideration. The authority of the African regional structures is also on the rise. First of all, the African Union, as the expressor of opinions and aspirations of the entire macro-region. Russia has actively supported the initiative to provide African Union with membership in the G20. This would be the right solution, which would reflect the reality and the balance of power in the modern world. We are open to cooperation with other regional integration groups of Africa. Yesterday, we had a special meeting with their leadership. We had launched an initiative to establish cooperation between the Eurasian Economic Union and the African Continental Free Trade Area, established within the African Union, to discuss the possibility of integrational synergy between these organizations. And we also share the aspiration of African states to take a more active part in the activities of the United Nations. We see the active position taken by the African Union in this regard. We stand ready for practical consideration of any proposals to expand the representation of Africans in the bodies of the United Nations, including in the context of the proposed reform of the UN Security Council. We believe it is time to mend the historic injustice towards the African continent. Distinguished colleagues, we have to admit the fact that the situation in numerous African regions remains unstable. We still see unsettled international and ethnic conflicts. acute political, social and economic crisis. This is the grave heritage of the colonial era, of the policy to divide and conquer of the Western metropolis in Africa. Terrorism, the spread of extremist ideology, transnational crime and piracy all hinder the continental development. To counter these threats, Russia also offers its assistance. We stand ready in active cooperation between the law enforcement bodies and the special services of the Russian Federation and the African countries. We also intend to continue professional training for servicemen and law enforcers of African countries in the Russian specialized academies and universities. Currently, the servicemen from numerous African states are studying in the universities of the Russian Defense Ministry. In order to enhance the defense capacity of the continent's countries, we enhance our partnership in the military and military technical areas. Russia has signed agreements on military and technical cooperations with over 40 African countries, which now receive a wide array of Russian weaponry and military equipment. Some of them is provided free of charge in order to enhance security and sovereignty of these states. Our African colleagues take active part in the military and technical forums and exercises organized by Russia, where they can see the advanced types of weaponry and military equipment in practical use. The attention of Russia to Africa is on the rise. This can be seen in our plans to expand the diplomatic presence on the continent. We are ready to restore and open new Russian foreign missions and increase the number of employees in a number of existing embassies in Africa. This is an actionable step to intensify our contacts with the African countries, the political, business contacts, as well as cooperation in the humanitarian area, the area of culture and tourism. As an example, let me mention that following many years of suspension, we are about to restore the functioning of the Russian embassies in Burkina Faso and Equatorial Guinea. We also intend to expand the network of Russian science and culture centers, also known as Russian houses. They are currently active in 8 African countries, and they are about to appear in a number of new African states. We would welcome similar steps by our African friends, and we will provide all the necessary support in the opening of new embassies, consulates and other missions of African countries in Russia. Dear friends, I would like to say a few words of the economic and humanitarian cooperation with Africa. Yesterday's forum shows that both Russia and the African countries are actually eager to enhance cooperation in these areas. And let me be frank, our business has something to offer our distinguished partners from Africa. Despite the turbulence on the global market, the volume of trade with Africa is on the rise. It is clear that we are not at our full capacity today. In absolute figures, the current volume of trade is not what we should be satisfied with. We can do much more. So far, the volume is quite modest. The growth of the Russian-African trade and the diversification would be promoted by the use of national currencies in the trade and the establishment of new transportation and logistics chains. We understand the importance of unhindered supply of food products for the social and economic development and the support of political stability of the African states. Therefore, we expand and extend the shipments of agricultural products to Africa. In the year 2022, we have sent 11.5 million tons of grains to African countries, and in the first 6 months of this year, we have sent another almost 10 million tons. Despite the illegal sanctions against our exports, which seriously hinder the shipments of Russian food products and complicate the transportation, logistics, insurance and bank transactions. let me underline that you, my dear friends, can rest assured that Russia shall always remain a responsible international supplier of agricultural products. We shall continue supporting the countries and regions in need. We will provide our grains and other food products, including shipments free of charge, shipments within the United Nations World Food Programme. Yesterday, as you know, we announced that in the upcoming 3 to 4 months we will provide additional 25 to 50,000 tons of grains to 6 African countries, free of charge. Overall, Russia intends to continue providing assistance for the development of the African continent by providing more than humanitarian assistance, but also trade preferences, supporting the creation of modern industries, agriculture, assistance through the relevant international structures and agencies. In particular, from 2020 to 2023, bilaterally, we have carried out 11 Russian humanitarian activities in 10 African countries. We were one of the first to come to the assistance of the continent states during the coronavirus pandemic. We have provided millions of test systems free of charge. We have provided mobile medical laboratories and equipment for the Special Infection Research Center. Russia takes part in the debt relief efforts for African countries. Currently, the overall sum of debt cancellation amounts to $23 billion. According to the latest request of the African countries, we will provide another $90 million for their development. To finish my statement, dear friends, let me underline once again that we are sincerely ready to stand side by side with our African friends to work for the future, to create a genuine strategic partnership and interaction. We appreciate our relations with each African country and with the continent in general, and we are sure of the successful future of these relations in the current multipolar world which is in development. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Allow me to give the floor to Chairperson of the African Union, President of the Union of the Comoros, Azali Assoumani. You have the floor. Your Excellency. Your Excellency, distinguished Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, distinguished Mr. Moussa Faki, President of the AU Commission, distinguished ladies and gentlemen present here, I bring you grace. Thank you for giving me the floor. At the outset, I would like to sincerely thank you for the warm welcome and hospitality. Thank you for having us here at this Russia-Africa Summit. We appreciated the dinner that you offered us yesterday. It was delicious, with wonderful concert. It showcased the great cultural potential behind this wonderful city of St. Petersburg. I would like to once again highlight our cooperation that sets an example. We have wonderful, skillful people, we have creativity, we have resilience, and it all deserves respect. This sets an example, and yesterday we reaffirmed it once again during our work that took place in wonderful conditions. It led to signing of multiple agreements which would contribute to our cooperation. Let me emphasize that our partnership holds great future, especially if we actively get on board the youth, the women. This is the future of our countries, and we need to nourish the skills of business to them. It would also benefit to the business climate of the African Union countries, as well as initiatives to encourage foreign direct investment. The African youth is very vibrant. There are a lot of startups, SMEs. A great deal of effort is invested in research and science. Despite shortages in investment, we need to take into account the priorities of each other. Certainly, the 2063 African Union agenda would contribute to the sustainable economic growth of the Russian Federation and the African Union. The African Union is engaged in the economic transformation. Certainly, Russia would participate in the investment. It would also benefit from our many resources. We want to build an economic and social Africa that is integrated in the rest of the world. Certainly, we need to develop trade, investment in line with our shared goals. When it comes to training in digital technologies, Russia has achieved a lot here. We need to create human capital in order to work successfully in this area, in order to support sustainable development, in order to engage an increasing number of young people. As for peace and security, as well as democracy and human rights, of course, we applaud the efforts of some of our partners, but we also ask some of the other partners not to interfere in our domestic affairs. We are fighting against unconstitutional changes. At times, something happens on our continent, and that does not benefit our countries. The African Union condemns the anti-constitutional changes in Niger. We also join here the international community. A few words on bilateral relations between Russia and the Comoros. In the 1980s, during the Soviet era, our country got an opportunity to send hundreds of students to the Soviet Union to train them, and today these people hold important positions at various authorities that are decision-making in our country, especially with regard to the business community and economic area. Some of them make part of my delegation. Many of them are interpreters. That is why we thank you for this friendly and efficient cooperation. I'm positive that all of my colleagues present here are also grateful to you. They wish to galvanize this cooperation with Russia. We hope that the Russia-Ukraine crisis that somewhat halted our relationship would see the resumption of our relations. Thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman. I believe that our yesterday's agenda was very meaningful, and I hope that you enjoyed the show. Just like the rest of you, our artists wanted to showcase not only what Russia has in terms of culture, but also the link between our cultures. And I believe that at the end of yesterday's events, they achieved to do that. Thank you for your statement. You have noted a lot of interesting things, especially when it comes to the youth. That is very sensitive. African young people are very talented. Many of those present here, despite the fact that a lot of time has passed after their training in the Soviet Union, they speak fluent Russian, highlights the quality of human potential in Africa. Thanks a lot. And now I give the floor to the interim president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré. Over to you, Your Excellency. Your Excellency, Mr. President, Comrade Vladimir Putin, Your Excellency, Chairman of the African Union, heads of the delegations, thank you. Hello. It gives me great honor to address you here this morning and to convey to you the fraternal greeting of my people. At the outset, I would like to thank the Almighty who allowed us to gather here today and to talk about the prosperity and the future of our peoples. I'm sorry for maybe offending you somehow. My generation asks a lot of questions, but does not get any answers. Here, we feel at home. Russia is also a family to Africa because we share history. Russia has sacrificed a lot to liberate Europe and the world from fascism. During World War II, we have shared history. We can say that we are forgotten peoples of the world, be it movies, books. In many ways, the role of Russia and Africa in the fight against Nazism has been forgotten. But today we stand together, and today we're here to talk about the future of our countries and what will happen tomorrow in this new free world to which we aspire for, where there will be no meddling in our domestic affairs. We have shared prospects, and I hope that this summit will provide an opportunity to establish just peace and just world order and relations between our peoples. It's not quite clear to me how come that Africa, that has so many resources, water, solar energy, how come that currently it is the poorest continent in the world with the highest levels of famine? How come that we have to ask for help? We ask ourselves, but we don't get any answers. We have a chance to build a new relationship. Hopefully, this relationship will be for the better to us in order to build a better future for our country. On behalf of my generation, I would like to say that due to poverty, many had to cross oceans in quest for a better life. At times they die, at times they starve. It's hard for them to survive. As for Burkina Faso, it's been 8 years since we have been facing the most barbaric and violent form of colonialism, barbarism. We are imposed this modern form of slavery. We were taught one thing: a slave that cannot rebel does not deserve pity. And we decided to fight against terrorists that impede our development and our struggle. Our peoples decided to take up arms in order to fight terrorism. We're surprised that imperialists, they are called militarized units, militarized groups. In Europe, people take arms in order to defend their motherland. They are called that they say that they are not patriots, but when my grandfather had to take up arms, it was against his will. When people decide to take up arms, there's another problem. The problem is that the heads of African states do not give anything to these people who fight against imperialism. They're calling us armed units, bandits. We do not agree with such an approach. Leaders of African states should not be puppets when imperialists treat them like that. I would like to convey a message to the heads of African states. We need to ensure self-sufficiency of our peoples, of our countries. We need to ensure food self-sufficiency, and we need to meet all the needs of our peoples. Since there's not much time left for my intervention, let me pay tribute to our peoples that fight against all the evil. Glory to our people, respect to our people, and victory to our people. Thank you, comrades.
Спасибо, уважаемый господин Трауре. На что хотел бы обратить внимание? Вот только что выступивший коллега сказал о роли России в борьбе с нацизмом. Она кем пытается быть затушевана, забывается.
Mr. Traore, indeed, the truth is distorted as someone, converted by someone, but indeed this struggle was fought by the Soviet Union to liberate humankind against Nazism. Let me draw your attention to the fact that the struggle of Africa for its independence and against apartheid has been going on not for the interest and for the benefit of the Africa per se, but also for the benefit of the humankind, because it leads to such results that improve the quality of relations in the world. Hence, it improves the situation in the world at large. And in this sense, I agree with Mr. Traore. It resembles pretty much what was happening with the Soviet Union, what has been happening with Russia in its struggle, and what is happening with Africa in their quest for genuine independence. It gives me great pleasure to give the floor to the President of the Central African Republic, or rather to the President of Republic of Cameroon, Paul Biya.
Monsieur le Président de la Fédération de Russie,
Your Excellency, President of the Russian Federation, at the outset, allow me to express my appreciation on behalf of my delegation and on my personal behalf for the warm welcome, fraternal welcome that was accorded to us in this wonderful city of St. Petersburg. At the same time, allow me to express my appreciation on behalf of all the African states and peoples for arranging and organizing this summit that would, without any doubt, help strengthen mutual understanding between Africa and the Russian Federation. Probably many are surprised at the interest that is showcased by Russia towards Africa. Here I would like to underscore, and everybody knows about that, in 1960s, we gained independence after a long struggle, and back in the day, Russia provided huge assistance and genuine assistance to my country. Once again, I would like to thank your grand country for this help. As for today's forum, it is dedicated to cooperation. This cooperation has always borne great results to Africa. Today, the world is facing many problems: drought, economic crisis, let alone the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a new page in our history, but let us not forget about other problems, skyrocketing inflation and other issues. In the face of these challenges, we call you for cooperation, the kind of cooperation that Russia has always enjoyed with Africa. I'm confident together we can offer new solutions to our peoples to address all challenges. There are more than 1 billion people living in Africa, yet we are underrepresented in international organizations, namely in the United Nations organization. We look forward to Russia's support in rectifying the current state of affairs, which is unjust. Let me also say that the development problems are still urgent for our countries. The current crisis has further aggravated the situation. Just like in the past, we hope that Russia would support us. It would help us find finance and resources What we want is to send a request to the IMF, to other financial institutions, in order to resolve our problems, to address security issues and terrorist challenges. That is the area where we also need to cooperate. Indeed, Russia provides assistance to many countries of the world in its fight against terrorism. Africa faces these issues as well as many other challenges, the whole range of them, but hopefully together we will move towards resolving these matters.
I won't keep listing all the difficulties and problems that we are facing. I would like to take this opportunity once again and thank the Russian Federation and its leadership for providing assistance to African countries in overcoming economic difficulties. Our students are studying at Russian universities. They get back to our country enriched with new knowledge, and this is something we are grateful to the Russian Federation for. I would like this forum to ensure that relations between Russia and Africa strengthen. Thank you for your attention. Our distinguished colleague has just said that some people are surprised at Russia's increasing attention to Africa. However, I personally think that this is hardly surprising. There is a certain apprehension regarding this process, but it is something else that is surprising. It was surprising that at a certain point in history, Russia started paying less attention to Africa, despite the positive experience of previous decades that we had accumulated. However, at some point, we did not pay enough attention to Africa. But given Africa's future, its potential, and our achievements accumulated over previous decades, it is only natural that we, Russia and Africa, restore our relations, and this process will continue unfolding. Our work today is another attempt to move down the same path. I now give the floor to President Touadéra of the Central African Republic. Thank you, Your Excellency, President Putin of the Russian Federation. Distinguished Chairman of the African Union, Heads of State, ladies and gentlemen, today I speak on behalf of the Central African Republic. I make my address at the plenary session of the Second Russia-Africa Forum that is taking place in the beautiful city of St. Petersburg. I would like to thank the Russian Federation for its resolve in supporting Africa in its fight for sovereignty and for our rights enshrined in the United Nations Charter. I would like to thank the Russian President, Russia's leadership and Russian people for the stellar organization of today's forum, as well as for the cooperation with Africa it is engaged in. Despite all the geopolitical hardships, as well as those in climate and energy that we are facing, the Central African Republic receives assistance from Russia. Our friendly relations are at an all-time high. Russia and the Central African Republic have enjoyed top-tier relations. Undaunted by geopolitical hardships, Russia provides assistance to our country, including to our armed forces and security forces, in their fight against terrorist organizations. In 2021, these terrorist groups attacked Bangui, our country's capital. Our countries, our people, have relations that saved the democracy in our country. We have organized a free and democratic election, and we have managed to avoid a new civil war that would have devastating consequences. On behalf of the people and the government of the Central African Republic, I would like to express our gratitude to the leadership of the Russian Federation. Thanks to Russia's support, our country has embarked on the path towards peace and prosperity. Currently, we hold a plethora of summits and make many promises, but not all of these promises are translated to reality. However, we are traversing a food and climate crisis. Africa is looking for reliable economic and financial partners. Africa is striving for equal and mutually respectful diplomatic relations, as well as mutually beneficial cooperation. For a long time, the Central African Republic was subjugated to a colonial power. In 2016, our country started a new page in its history. Today, we diversify our diplomatic relations and establish bilateral ties with all countries who are desirous of doing so. We develop economic relations and various programs. The Russia-Africa Forum, that focuses on a humanitarian component this year, is an opportunity to resist the hegemony of certain participants of international relations. As part of innovative cooperation with Russia, we are looking for practical and sustainable solutions for our country and the entire African continent. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our country, its subsoil resources and its nature are full of riches. However, these resources are not enough today, because the colonial yoke continues to remind of itself, persists. The Central African Republic invites all countries of the world to a mutually beneficial and effective cooperation within a world order based on the United Nations Charter. African countries want to see their ideals translated into reality, as well as peace, security, and harmonious development. Thank you. Dear colleague, you said some kind words about our international relations. Naturally, we will preserve the same level of international relations, including in the most sensitive areas of our cooperation. There can be no doubt about that. However, we can do and must do more. We have plenty of opportunities and will do so. We will develop our relations in this area. I now give the floor to the President of the Republic of Uganda, President Museveni. The floor is yours.
Now allow me to give the floor to the President of the Republic of Congo, Mr. Sassou Nguesso. Distinguished Mr. President of the Russian Federation, Distinguished Chairman of the African Union, President of the Union of Comoro Islands, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and governments, distinguished Chair of the Commission of the African Union, ladies and gentlemen, our delegation would like to thank you for the warm hospitality. We are glad to seize the opportunity to take part in the second Russia-Africa Summit. First of all, I would like to sincerely thank the President, His Excellency Mr. Vladimir Putin, for the warm hospitality that we've enjoyed here. The issues discussed during our today's session, in my view, are first of all our aspiration to peace, security and development. Each era in history is a separate generation. Each generation has its own challenges. In Africa, we are always talking about unity. Previously, we were fighting against colonialism. We had to fight against the apartheid. We had to fight for our independence. And during this fight, Africa has enjoyed the support of the former Soviet Union in its fight for independence. And all of that was a part of the strategy of solidarity. This used to be called the internationalism principle. In order to achieve genuine independence, the African countries required competent professional elites. And then, the former Soviet Union has provided us with great assistance. Millions was spent for the professional training and education for African specialists. Thousands of scholarships have been provided. Today, our goal is development for the good of 2 billion Africans. That is the population that we're expected to see by the year 2050. Today, just like yesterday, as part of the liberation struggle, we are saying that we are fighting. We are fighting for our development. And Africa cannot continue this fight alone without its friends and partners. The world today has turned into a global village. We're all living together. Mr. President, today we can confirm that the industrialization of our continent is not possible without electrification. You may remember the famous slogan of the great revolutionary of your country, who said that socialism is the Soviet power plus the electrification of the whole country. At the same time, today, as we see the situation, 600 million Africans, let me repeat, 600 million people in Africa do not have access to electricity. Moreover, speaking of the African continental free trade area, as well as the free movement of people, of goods and services, we must say that this is not possible without modern means of transportation, logistics, transportation links, the railroads, the sea traffic, the telecommunications, the airports. The African continental free trade area is the manifestation of a new vision for our future. However, the implementation of the free trade area is only possible if supported by the relevant infrastructure, and these investments are quite costly. And if our countries are left alone, this would be equal to suicide. The implementation of such plans is only possible if we unite our efforts as part of the continental or the regional and sub-regional organizations. Assistance to Africa by Russia means strategic partnership, and we call for the establishment of a strategic, mutually beneficial partnership. At the same time, we, as the African countries, shall concentrate on defining the main priorities, the main infrastructural projects, which would be subject for future negotiations as part of the state-private partnership. We will be seeking diversified financial sources, including concessions, loans. For the long term, we may discuss various sources of financement. Africa can only continue its development in the conditions of synergy. Self-isolation is unacceptable for us. Sure, there are small-scale projects currently in place, but we need the large-scale ones. We do not expect any generosity for us. We are not begging for money. The Russian-African partnership has a great future. Africa has vast resources. Our vision of the future of our cooperation is a vast vision, and we're doing this in the name of peace. Based on the mutual trust and confidence between the partners. This would allow us to comply with all the obligations and complete all the initiatives. Speaking of peace in Africa, I would like to repeat that we do have an aspiration for peace in Africa and in Europe as well. This is exactly why I am once again calling to put an end to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. There is one African saying: it goes that grass suffers from the elephants walking on it. This means various aspects of our activities. This is a comprehensive problem. Our population is affected by new